Hello and welcome to the Sherdog Radio preview for UFC 265, Lewis versus Gane. As usual, I'm your host, Ben Duffy of Sherdog.com. With me in the co-pilot's chair, rather than your usual co-host Keith Schillen, is Lev Pisarski of Sherdog.com. Lev is a feature writer and contributor for the site, has been with us since 2020, and I'm very excited to have him here. How are you doing, Lev?
Pretty well. I'm very excited to dig into this particular card.
Me too. Obviously this one's taking place in Houston. Anyone who has watched this show a few times knows that I am a Houston resident. I am covering the event live. You can tell it is fight week because I've got captain credential on the wrist. I went to the media day today, and I'll have a few reflections about different fighters that spoke today. Not a whole lot, how generic those things are, but a few observations here and there. In talking about this card, I think it's almost worth it to start by focusing on what we won't be seeing this time. Obviously, this card originally had a women's bantamweight title fight on it in the form of Amanda Nunes versus
Juliana Pena.
I kept wanting to say Julia Vila. No. And Juliana Pena, that one fell off about a week out from fight night when Nunes and basically her whole family turned out to have COVID. Her wife, UFC strawweight Nina Nunes, and their daughter. It sounds like they're all well on their way to recovery, including the baby. So that's wonderful. But ultimately, when that fell off, all of a sudden, the UFC's roundly reviled decision to put a heavyweight interim title fight in this card ended up looking pretty smart because they didn't have to scramble for another title fight to justify this pay-per-view. Any thoughts about the? I haven't sounded you out about this. Like, are you with me on the interim titles thing, or do you not care one way or the other? Do you think it's stupid? Do you think it's great?
I think in this case, it's incredibly stupid and it's very insulting. Francis Ngannou is unquestionably the champion. Whoever wins this will win an excellent heavyweight fight, but they will not be any kind of champion. In fact, I think I might have mentioned this in a column once, but I think this is one of the few times where an interim title actually takes away from a fight, because on its own merits, this is an excellent fight between Derrick Lewis and Ciryl Gane. But with the interim title, it just smacks of falsehood, of illegitimacy, because the champion is Francis Ngannou, and all this is an attempt to strong arm him into accepting the UFC's pay terms, as well as just putting on a random championship fight on a pay-per-view. But right. Neither of these guys is the champion.
And really, the crux of this is that they wanted Ngannou versus Lewis on this card. Mm-hmm. And Ngannou said, I'm not going to be ready to defend by then. The problem for me, like as you pointed out, Ngannou is the champion, is that Ngannou is healthy. It's not as though he's been on the shelf for a year. He fought in March. He just won the title in March and promptly went back to Africa on, doing some humanitarian work. But he told the UFC, I'm not going to be ready to fight in early August. I'd like to fight in, September, October, something like that. And even that concession, was too much for the UFC. They were like, no, we want Lewis on the Houston card. And so they made this fight. In terms of the fight itself, it doesn't bother me too badly because there have been a few examples in UFC history of an interim champion being promoted to undisputed champ without a unification fight. Hayden Barao was promoted to undisputed champ when Dominic Cruz really, really, really couldn't come back and defend. Robert Whittaker was promoted from interim champ when George St. Pierre retired. But for the most part, an interim title fight is nothing more than a title eliminator with some gold hardware. It just basically says, okay, you're the interim champ. You're first in line to fight the real champ when he gets back. And that's basically what this fight is. I mean, if they put this fight on a month ago and said, this is the title eliminator, the winner of Lewis versus Gane is the next challenger for Ngannou, none of us would have blinked. We would have said that makes sense, right?
Yeah, I agree, but I think they should have called it a number one contenders match. It would have made it far more palatable for me.
And I'm with you on that. You know, it's the UFC's fixation with, you know, having a title fight on every pay-per-view if they can. And, you know, they are what they are. I can't imagine this will change. But anyway, long way around to saying that Nunes versus Pena is not on this card. And for me, that's a bummer. I mean, I love watching Derrick Lewis fight. It's going to be a treat to see him fight in his hometown. But in my mind, Amanda Nunes is the best fighter on the planet. You know, I want to see her fight as many times as I can before she decides to hang it up. So that's a bit of a bummer. The other fight that we won't be seeing is Nicco Montano. She missed weight. She missed the bantamweight limit this time by about 7 pounds, was scratched from the card, and summarily released by the UFC. Were you surprised by that news?
Not really. I believe she had about 6 cancellations, and 5 of those were her fault, and 3 of those had to do with weight cuts. So it's just very obvious at this point that she is not able to get herself ready for these fights, either in terms of weight or in terms of health. She's been given numerous opportunities to do so. Usually I take the side of the fighters against the UFC, but in this case, yeah, it made perfect sense to release her.
I'm torn as well. Like normally, you know, I always wonder, you know, could the UFC be providing these fighters more support? You know, right out the gate, could they be paying them more so that they could all be afford to be training full time, have the proper nutritional support, you know, have health insurance, things like that. And also, well, I feel as though she's been mistreated in a promotional sense, you know, in more ways than one. But yeah, when you get a fighter that's missed weight multiple times, especially multiple times in multiple weight classes, that I can understand the UFC having to let someone go for that. I mean, ultimately their job is to show up on Friday, make the contracted weight, show up on Saturday and fight. And I mean, she's failed to do that more than just about any fighter I can think of in UFC history at this point. So I don't know what's next for her. I mean, Combate Global CEO Campbell McLaren was very quick to express his disinterest. I don't know if she'll show up in Bellator. I don't know if she'll show up in bare knuckle or she's just done with fighting. But you know, farewell, Nicco Montano. We barely knew ye.
I think actually for her most recent fight against Yanan Wu, she actually spent a lot of time at the UFC PI, which has often really helped fighters who have struggled with weight. Mm-hmm. So the fact that she availed herself of that resource and still missed weight by 7 pounds, it's a really bad sign. And I think there's almost no chance Bellator picks her up because they have 125 and 145 pound weight divisions. There's no way she's making 125. And I don't know, she'd be like just so undersized at 145 and probably not really worth the money.
So you're saying that PFL is going to pick her up and stick her at 155 because she's
absolutely.
She's about the same 100%. Size as Mariana Moraes, you know, who also used to fight at flyweight. Hey, that's what we're going to get. All right. If I don't buckle this down, you and I are just going to go off on tangents for an hour because that's kind of how we rock. We've got a 13 fight card coming from the Toyota Center, 5 fight main card with some pretty interesting, you know, contender matchups on it. The undercard, as is usually the case these days, a bit of a mixed bag, some legit, really interesting prospects, some former prospects with their back against the wall, some people who are just, they're just another fighter and they may or may not be in the UFC a year from now. You ready to dig into these?
Absolutely.
First up on the UFC 265 prelims is a bantamweight matchup featuring Johnny Munoz and Jamey Simmons, two young prospects who are looking for their first UFC win in their second UFC try. Munoz, the 28-year-old Californian, is 10-1 overall. He's 0-1 in the UFC. Made his promotional debut last August at UFC Fight Night Brunson versus Shabazian, where he dropped a unanimous decision to Joseph Nathan Maness. He's taking on Simmons, the man who goes by Afro Samurai, is 28 years old as well. He is 7-3 overall. He's 0-1 in the UFC, having drawn just about the most brutal assignment possible, stepping up on short notice to fight Giga Chikadze at UFC on ESPN Santos versus Tecia last November. He was summarily put away with a head kick and some follow-up punches late in the first round of that affair. Odds on this one do heavily favor Munoz. He's out there around minus 250, where you can get Simmons at plus 210, plus 215 or so. I will kick this one to you first, Lev. How do you feel about this fight? Who do you think wins? And bonus question, do you think the winner is like UFC material for real, like, and has some staying power, or are both these guys probably not long for the promotion?
That's an interesting question. Both fighters, they actually had their first fights at featherweight, and now this one is actually contested at bantamweight.
Thank you for pointing that out. I should have added that to the setup. Yes.
Now, in the case of Jamey Simmons, that makes perfect sense. He's only 5'6". He has a fairly short reach, and he definitely looked kind of paunchy at 145 against Giga Chikadze, but that was on short notice, so it's perfectly understandable. I think 135 will probably suit him a lot better, and he won't struggle to make weight. It's a little less clear in the case of Johnny Munoz because he, I think, is like 5'9", and he looked very dry and very lean against Nate Maness. So I think he might really struggle to make 135. And more than just that, it might really impact his cardio negatively because in the Maness fight, his wrestling started out at this level in round one. It went down to this level in round two. And then by round three, it was just a complete non-entity. And even he got taken down at the end of a fight. So that's definitely an interesting wrinkle, how the weight cut will affect him. In general, it's hard to say how the fight will go because we don't know what Jamey Simmons's defensive wrestling is like. His striking is somewhat basic. He has a nice right cross he looks to hit again and again. He has some defensive flaws which were taken advantage of by Giga Chikadze. His offensive wrestling is not that good. He got like double underhooks against Giga Chikadze, couldn't really convert it. But we don't know what his defensive wrestling is going to be like. And Johnny Munoz, he's a guy who's going to try to take you down early and often, always looking for the takedown because he does have very nice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from the top. But it's just not clear whether Simmons will be able to defend or not. Simmons, he does have a college wrestling background, but that doesn't always mean that you'll defend takedowns in MMA at any level. If he does keep it standing, it's actually not a guarantee that Simmons wins. Munoz, he does actually have like some solid movement and defense, but his hands are very limited. He mainly throws kicks, but his kicks are rather weak and can definitely be countered. So I actually think it's a very murky fight. I would certainly not bet Munoz as minus 250, because while it's possible that, yeah, he gets a takedown early and submits Jamey Simmons, we just don't know enough about Jamey Simmons's defensive grappling at this level. So if you put a gun to my head, I probably would choose Johnny Munoz, but I think it's very unclear and there's a lot of question marks about his victory.
Okay, well, I am going to put the at least metaphorical gun to your head. You've got so it sounds like you're leaning Munoz. Are you seeing decision, submission, KO?
Well, definitely not KO. Yeah, either he gets a submission from the top, or maybe he gets enough takedowns if his cardio holds up at this new weight, which again is he looked very lean and dry at 145. So I can't imagine this is going to be an easy weight cut for him.
Yeah, I see a much higher ceiling for Munoz in the UFC, assuming he figures out a weight class for himself and gets comfortable at it. I do think he has some staying power, whereas I'm not sure of the same about Simmons. Munoz is a guy who actually, pinged my radar, probably 2 years ago as he was cleaning up in King of the Cage, and I just figured he's a guy we would see on the Contender Series sooner than later. Instead, he got the call straight up to the UFC, but he's a guy that I wasn't surprised at all to see in the octagon last year. Whereas Simmons, came up on short notice, and going back and looking at his tape, there's a pretty hard divide. He styled on the really low level guys, and on the guys that were kind of Contender Series or lower level UFC material themselves, he struggled. Going on that alone, I am leaning Munoz, just kind of the classic wrestle grappler, that and some aggression and being the physically superior fighter will get you a long ways in this sport. So assuming he's not just a dead man from the weight cut, I'm thinking this might not even make it to the point of the fight where cardio becomes an issue. So I'm going to go with Munoz, and I'm going to go with Munoz by a submission, probably within the first half of the fight, either first round or early second. Just to split the difference, I'm going to say first round. Johnny Munoz by first round submission. We head down to the flyweight division next for a matchup between Victoria Leonardo and Melissa Gatto. Leonardo, the 31-year-old from Shreveport, Louisiana, is 8-3 overall. She is 0-1 since joining the UFC out of last year's Dana White's Contender Series. Made her debut against the also debuting Menifield and got head kicked in the second round of that fight. That was just back in January. She is taking on Gatto. The 25-year-old Brazilian is stepping back into the cage for the first time in nearly 3 years, despite being just 25 years of age. She is a somewhat tarnished but perfect 6-0-2 overall, and again has not fought since September of 2018, though for what it's worth, that win was over UFC bantamweight Carol Hosa. So make of that what you will. She submitted her in the first round of that fight. Odds on this one, they're pretty much a pick 'em. Both women are out there around minus 105, minus 110. I'm just going to say I have no idea how to prognosticate the fight of a 25-year-old woman who hasn't fought since she was 22. Early in a fighter's career, obviously they can make such incremental or such exponential improvements just between fights when it's like 6 months, let alone when it's 3 years. And it's hard to tell whether that time off has been her just languishing or her really sharpening up her game. Whereas with Leonardo, she is a bit more of a known quantity to me. In her fights, coming up towards the UFC, and she has some good wins, like Chelsea Hackett, Stephanie Geltmacher are good wins. Her losses to Menifield, Erin Blanchfield, and all the way back very early in both women's careers, Miranda Maverick, are basically her getting bullied by physically stronger women. That seems to be kind of her poison. Her game really does run on being the stronger woman in the cage. She thrives when that is the case. She struggles when it is not. again, I may feel really, really silly about this one about 90 seconds into the fight when it turns out that, you know, Melissa Gatto has turned into a Super Saiyan in her 3 years off. But I'll believe that when I see it. And until I see it, I am going to go with the more known quantity because I have no reason to believe that Gatto is going to come out there and just be a physical specimen like Manon Fiorot was, and just so much bigger and stronger and quicker. I expect Victoria Leonardo to probably just grind out a decision in this one. So give me a very tentative Leonardo by decision, but I think we'll probably learn a lot about both women.
Yeah, so you hit the nail right on the head. In fact, there's a very good example of a Brazilian woman who had her last fight at 22, then debuted in the UFC at 25 and turned out to be a really excellent fighter, and that is Amanda Ribas. Amanda Ribas, also exact same ages, hadn't fought in 3 years, was an underdog against Emily Whitmire. And not only was she an underdog, but people were really betting Emily Whitmire, right? And if you just go off of Amanda Ribas's fights back in Brazil, including she had like a KO loss to Poliana Viana and everything, it made some sense. But what happened? Well, Amanda Ribas had just improved tremendously, right? She absolutely dominated Emily Whitmire grappling, won by rear naked choke. And then she just showed herself to be a really high-level talented fighter, just dominating a slew of women until finally, in a fight she was also dominating, Marina Rodriguez knocked her out. But that's definitely a possibility for Melissa Gatto, because I watched her last fight against Karol Rosa, and okay, she obviously was lacking in many departments, right? Her stand up is very weak. Her defense isn't there. Her takedown defense is very poor. But these are all things that could be improved massively in the 3 years. The one thing she did have against Karol Rosa is she had a pretty good submission game off her back. She was just not only was she throwing up individual submissions, but she was transitioning very well from one to another. And she did that to where Karol Rosa couldn't really keep up. And eventually she got her kind of an unusual sub. I don't think it would work against Karol Rosa now, but she got her Kimura from her back after attacking a lot with arm bars and triangles. But here's the thing: Victoria Leonardo is just not a good fighter. There's no nice way to say it. She's slow. Her striking is quite poor. Her defense is very poor. She has just enough wrestling where against Chelsea Hackett, who is this like 21 or 22, I think 21-year-old Australian striker, right? She was able to take her down and beat her there, right? Just enough wrestling to do that. I don't know that it's going to work against almost anyone else, because I thought Manon Fiorot had like a big weakness in terms of her takedown defense. She was also like this striker, right, who had never really fought grapplers, had been taken down. And even Manon Fiorot had no problems staying upright against her. I also don't even think Victoria Leonardo likes being hit. I feel like she kind of gave up against Manon Fiorot, frankly. Like she just didn't want any more of that, and that's really not a good quality. So yeah, I mean, we know so little about Melissa Gatto, but I'm just so unimpressed with Victoria Leonardo that I'm going to take a chance on her improvement over those 3 years. I'm going to say I'm going to say Melissa Gatto by submission. Let's go with that.
All righty. We have some dissension early on this card, so buckle up, folks. It's going to be a wild ride. I don't know that for a fact. The UFC 265 prelims power on, and we are back up in the bantamweight division as it is Miles Johns meeting Anderson dos Santos. Johns, the 27-year-old LFA veteran, is 11-1 overall. He is 2-1 since joining the UFC out of Dana White's Contender Series Season 3. He fought most recently on the UFC's Halloween Fight Night card last year, where he knocked out Kevin Natividad in the 3rd round. He's taking on Dos Santos. The 36-year-old Brazilian is 21-8 overall. He is 1-2 in the UFC. He fought most recently last November at UFC on ESPN Smith versus Clark, where he choked out Martin Day with a guillotine late in the 1st round. That was his first UFC win after going 0-2 in his first 2 against Nad Narimani and Andre Ewell. Odds on this one, Johns is a comfortable favorite. He is -210. You can get Dos Santos around +175 as the underdog. Keith, I can't believe I just said Keith. That is how reflexive this is for me. Lev, who do you have in this one, and how do you see it playing out?
Well, I think you have to go with Miles Johns. I think this is specifically a fight for him to win, and he is a good fighter who's showing like solid improvement. His striking was a lot better his last time out. In fact, I'd say his striking is already very decent, and of course he's a very good wrestler who just takes guys down and has a significant ground and pound, and is able to do that for quite a long period in a fight. His opponent, Anderson dos Santos, also relies on his own grappling, but I just don't see him having much success against a guy who wrestles as well as Miles John, and who has also shown that he himself has very good Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, very good submission defense. So I don't really see any area where Anderson dos Santos can trouble him, certainly not on the feet. I think good wrestling and good Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu beat out okay wrestling and even very good Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So, and even in terms of cardio, Miles John, he's very solid in that regard. Anderson dos Santos is 36. So, yeah, I'm not really seeing a real coherent path to victory for the Brazilian. I'm just going to predict Miles John wins by decision because I think Anderson dos Santos is a tough guy.
I'm with you on a lot of those observations. You know, the way their respective skills match up, you broke them down very well, and it leads to very limited paths to victory for dos Santos. You know, when you see a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy versus someone who presents initially as a wrestler, especially someone like dos Santos who has quite a few guillotine finishes, you're like, well, you know, maybe you could hurt him on the feet, get him to take a bad shot, and just grab his neck. But that's really not been a problem for Johns. Really, his best path to victory might be to get taken down and like initiate a scramble. He does have nice slick back takes on the ground. That's where a lot of his rear naked chokes have come from, but I'm not going to bet on that to happen. You know, the more likely thing is that Johns gets the best of it on the feet, and it only even goes to the ground if he wants it to go there. You know, either just as a safety valve if he's getting something he doesn't like on the feet, or just to, you know, take some time off and steal rounds. But yeah, I have Johns by a pretty one-sided decision here. I would probably expect him to win all 3 rounds, but I'm with you in that dos Santos has been a tough guy, you know, and he's not horrible anywhere. And well, I can't say this about Johns now that he completely iced Kevin Natividad, but before that fight, I didn't think of him as like a one-shot, like kill shot guy. I mean, you know, maybe that's the next wrinkle he brings out. But yeah, I'm with you. Miles Johns by a pretty straightforward, probably pretty one-sided decision. We bounce from bantamweight right back down to flyweight once again, as it is former Ryzen champ Manel Kape versus Ode Osbourne. Kape, the 27-year-old Angolan by way of Thailand, is 15-6 overall. He is 0-2 in the UFC, having been turned aside in his first 2 Octagon appearances after signing with the UFC and taking all of 2020 off. He debuted against Alexandre Pantoja in February, dropping a unanimous decision. Came back on just 6 weeks turnaround and dropped a split decision to Matheus Nicolau, and that was at UFC Fight Night Edwards versus Muhammad. So the star from Ryzen, who goes by Starboy, has his back against the wall just a bit here. He's going to seek to right the ship against the Jamaican sensation. Osbourne, the 29-year-old fighting out of Wisconsin, is 9-3 with 1 no contest overall. He is 1-1 since joining the UFC out of season 3 of Dana White's Contender Series. Most recently, he appeared at UFC Fight Night Overeem versus Volkov back in February, where he knocked out Jerome Rivera in just 26 seconds. That allowed him to bounce back from his unsuccessful UFC debut, in which he was guillotined by Brian Kelleher in just half a round back at UFC 246 last January. Odds on this one do favor Kape to get his first UFC win. He's out there at -185 or so, where you can get Osbourne at +155 or 160 or so on the comeback. Lev, sound like from our conversation between segments here, it sounds like you are leaning towards Kape to get it done here and for third time to be the charm. Am I right?
Yeah. Well, a lot of people did think Kape deserved the decision in his second fight against Matheus Nicolau. In fact, I even want to say the majority of people on MMA decisions, both media and fans, thought he won the fight. It was very close. But the crazy thing for me is that Ode Osbourne, he had his previous fights at featherweight 145, and he's going down all the way to flyweight 125, which is, I actually had to check that to make sure that was right. I was like, well, maybe this is wrong, but no, he's actually going down 2 weight classes from his last time out, which just is mind-boggling to me. It's obviously his chin is going to take a huge hit, which is a big deal in this matchup because Kape hits extremely hard for a flyweight. He has tremendous power at that weight class. And also one of the biggest problems when you drop weight classes is that the guys are a lot quicker. And Osbourne, he was fast enough at 145. I wouldn't say he was tremendously fast, but the guys at 125 are just so much faster than 145. Even going from 145 to 135, there's a big speed disparity, and it's really big in this case. Not to mention, as a lot of people have noted, the 125 guys, they're just so technical. Their technique, their skill level is really, really high. Probably even higher than, well, certainly the level of 145 that Ode Osbourne was at. So it's a very strange decision, and I think it's a very bad decision against Kape, who again hits so hard, and he's not really known for his speed, but compared to what Osbourne is used to, he might as well be the fastest guy in MMA. So yeah, I think Kape gets it done with a knockout, probably even in the first round.
Outstanding. Thank you. I'm with you. And disclaimer right off the bat, I still believe in Manel Kape. I was very high on him coming over from Ryzen. I thought it was a fantastic get for the UFC because even among people who were over there in Ryzen and doing well, he struck me as a guy who was young and whose physical tools and skill set would probably serve him well in a Western promotion. So I was pleasantly surprised when the UFC signed him. I was bummed when he ended up spending an entire year on the shelf, but not surprising considering that while he, is Angolan born, he's been fighting out of Thailand for, several years. And that's one of the countries that was hit hardest by COVID. So I'm not surprising, but, in his UFC debut, he just really had kind of a deer in the headlights performance against Alessandro Pantoja. Just didn't pull the trigger. I was with you. I picked him to beat Matheus Nicolau, and I thought he beat Matheus Nicolau. So, when he didn't get the decision, that was a bummer. This is an interesting third chance here. The UFC is not doing their usual kind of like spiteful grind them into the dirt thing they do with champs coming over from other promotions. They seem to be giving him every chance to kind of work out the rust, work out the jitters, and see where he really falls in this division. And Osbourne is an interesting test, but definitely a winnable one. As far as the actual X's and O's, I think you're absolutely right. Assuming Osbourne even makes weight, and I haven't seen him around this week, so I don't know what he looks like. Sometimes you see a fighter walking around, you're like, oh, like he looks like death warmed over. Well, you can tell. Like, you can tell. A lot of times you can tell by the media day and the press conferences, because the ones who are in like pretty jovial spirits, they're either right on weight and they're feeling great, or they know they're going to miss by a mile and they're just living it up. I had that feeling about Lando Venata at 262. I was like, because Venata was dropping to 145 after being at 155 for a while, and he was just in such good spirits and just looked so great physically. I was like, oh, he's going to make it and he's going to fight great. And yeah, he both things happened. But I'm with you. I think Kape is going to be really fast. I think he's going to take advantage of some of Osbourne's defensive lapses. He's going to catch that chin. It is a chin that does not have the padding of that extra 20 pounds of water around the brain. And yeah, I think Kape's going to get a performance of the night type knockout. And I'm, again, with you. I think it's probably going to be in the first round. Next up, it is a strawweight matchup. And of the strawweight matchups on this card, this is the one that I would have guessed the two women had run into each other sometime 5 or 6 years ago, but this isn't the one. Somehow, Karolina Kowalkiewicz and Jessica Penne never ran into one another back in 2016, 2017, when both were contenders. They are meeting now. Penne coming back from a long layoff, and Kowalkiewicz just one fight into the return from her own very long layoff. Kowalkiewicz, the 35-year-old from Poland, is 12-6 overall. She is 5-6 in the UFC, and she is currently mired in a 4-fight losing streak that stretches all the way back to 2018. Again, because of some time off. She fought most recently in February of last year, dropping a unanimous decision to Xiao Nanyan. Prior to that, she lost to Alexa Grasso. Before that, Michelle Watterson, and before that, suffered one of the nastiest knockouts in the history of the division at the hands of Jessica Andrade, and that's all the way back at UFC 228 in September of 2018. She's taking on Penne, the 38-year-old out of Alliance MMA, is 13-5 overall. She is 2-3 in the UFC. She fought most recently back in April at UFC on ESPN, Whitaker versus Gastelum, taking a split decision over Lupita Godinez. That snapped a 3-fight losing streak for her, but more importantly, that was her first fight back in almost exactly 4 years. She had walked away from the sport in 2017, decided to come back this year, and got off on the right foot. Nonetheless, she is the slight underdog here. Kowalkiewicz out there around minus 120 or so. Penne available still at even money or around plus 105. Lev, I will definitely kick this one to you first. Who do you see winning this fight? How? And does the winner, at least, is the winner a factor in the strawweight division, or has this division moved on past these two former title challengers?
Oh, it's definitely moved past both of them. In fact, I fought Jessica Penne should have lost that fight to Lupita Godinez. The judges disagreed. And by the way, props to her because I think she was a huge underdog. So people didn't expect her to give any trouble to this UFC newcomer. But it was a very close fight. One I thought she lost. Karolina Kowalkiewicz, yeah, she her performance against Yan Xiaonan, it actually kind of reminded me of some of Diego Sanchez's recent outings, where you see a guy or a girl in this case who used to be so much better. I mean, Karolina Kowalkiewicz in I think it was late 2016, she beat the Vagros Namajunas, the champion at 115. And yeah, she just looked like a different fighter in her last outing. She just was so slow. Just her physical strength wasn't there. She looks like she probably lost some muscle mass. Um, I hate to pin it on this, but she did go to a vegan diet uh, before the Yan Xiaonan fight, so who knows? Maybe that had something to do with it. But whatever the result, she just didn't look like she even belonged in the same cage as Yan Xiaonan. Yan Xiaonan, who is not known for her grappling by any means, she's a striker. She nevertheless threw Karolina Kowalkiewicz around like a rag doll at times, which reminded me when Diego Sanchez fought Michel Pereira, and Michel Pereira also threw him around like a rag doll. Yeah, Karolina Kowalkiewicz, even on a physical level, just seems totally out of it. At the same time, if there was one fighter that she could beat, it might be Jessica Penne, who is really doesn't have much in the way of striking, especially nowadays. Basically, relied on grappling to beat Lupita Godinez. So yeah, it's a tough fight. It really depends on if Karolina Kowalkiewicz can recapture any degree of a form she used to have. If she can, then maybe she'll win a more clear decision. If she's degraded even further, then who knows? She might even be submitted. But yeah, I don't see Penne's grappling as being all that threatening. I think she's even against this version of Karolina Kowalkiewicz, who is just slow and noticeably weaker. Even there, I think she's going to have a severe disadvantage in the striking. And she's 38 years old herself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you really force me to, I'll say Karolina Kowalkiewicz wins the decision here. And hopefully, if her heart is not in fighting, which it doesn't look like it has been for quite a while, hopefully she retires, because I know she got really badly hurt in the Yan Xiaonan fight. And no one wants to see fighters get hurt unnecessarily.
I'm picking up a lot of the same dynamic you are from this fight. It was very surprising how physically just kind of shop-worn and degraded Kowalkiewicz looked in her last fight. She's somebody who, on her way up in the strawweight division, her calling card, or at least the narrative that the UFC hung on her as she made her way to a title fight against Joanna Jędrzejczyk, was that, yeah, Joanna Jędrzejczyk lands 10.5 strikes per minute. It's incredible. But Karolina Kowalkiewicz lands 12 strikes per minute. It's unbelievable. And it just felt like the UFC reaching for an angle from which they could present it as a competitive fight. Kind of like when they sold Alexander Gustafsson because he was taller than John Jones. It was the only thing they could come up with. And of course, Jędrzejczyk put her through the wood chipper. And it turned out that Kowalkiewicz's her real strength pun intended, fully, was her strength. It wasn't that, she was this ultra high output kickboxer. It was because she was physically strong and she was capable of tossing some women around. And that dynamic was absolutely flipped on its head against Yan Xiaonan. I think this is going to be an ugly fight. Penne certainly is far removed from her best version of herself as well, but the things that she was good at, just kind of closing the distance against a niftier striker, as long as it's not Jan Jacek, who obviously busted her up badly, and getting to the clinch and kind of making the clinch a safe space for herself, either to land short shots and just kind of run out the clock, or even get takedowns and work her submission game. I think those are things she can still do to Karolina Kowalkiewicz. Unless Kowalkiewicz comes back and she just looks transformed, maybe she started eating steak again, or maybe just, changed her workout plan or whatever it is. And unless she looks markedly different, I am leaning towards the 2021 version of Jessica Penne over the 2021 version of Kowalkiewicz. Like you, I'm a little ambivalent about it. It's not a strong pick, but I will go in the other direction here, and I'll say give me Jessica Penne via decision for the very, very slight upsets. And this will, if there's any opposite of the fight of the night, this will probably be it. I'll say this. This is the fight that I am most confident there will not be a finish.
I will say in Kowalkiewicz's defense, right, that she's not bad in the clinch. In fact, that's exactly how she beat Rose Namajunas. She does have some solid clinch striking. She even got I believe a takedown from the clinch. Don't quote me on that. Versus Fug Rose. So I don't think that's necessarily an area of advantage for Jessica Penne, unless Kowalkiewicz has degraded even further. But possible.
See, I agree with you. I think if these two had fought in 2016, Kowalkiewicz would have mauled her. I'm wondering whether she'd still be able to do that in her present physical condition against Jessica Penne, someone who's kind of been on the slope down in her 30s, right, whereas Kowalkiewicz kind of went over a cliff. But no, I agree. The clinch would not have been a safe place for Jessica Penne if they'd fought in their primes. But here I'm kind of thinking it might be. I'm open to being shown.
Possible.
Yeah, show me I'm wrong, Karolina. Come on. Anything else on this one?
No, yeah, it's really unclear as well. It really depends on what Karolina Kowalkiewicz has left.
We finally head out of the lighter weight classes and all the way up to light heavyweights on the UFC 265 prelims, as it is Alonzo Menifield taking on Ed Herman. Menifield, the 33-year-old fighting out of Dallas, Texas, is 10-2 overall. He is 3-2 in the UFC since joining out of the second season of Dana White's Contender Series. He fought most recently in March, getting a first round, not quite Von Flue choke, kind of a shoulder pressure choke over short notice debutant Fabio Cherant. That was back at UFC 260. That snapped a 2-fight losing streak that represent the only 2 losses of his career, as he dropped a unanimous decision to Devin Clark last June and was knocked out late in the second round by Ovin St. Preux at UFC Fight Night Overeem versus Sakai last September. He's taking on Herman, who, with the release of Diego Sanchez from UFC roster earlier this year, is now the veteran of the earliest season of The Ultimate Fighter to still be in the UFC. The Tough 3 stalwart, yes, we're talking about 2005 or 6, folks, is 2 months shy of his 41st birthday. He is 26-14 with 1 no contest overall. He's 13-10 with 1 no contest in the UFC. He is on a unlikely 3-fight winning streak, nonetheless, stretching all the way back to 2019. Most recently, he tapped out Mike Rodriguez last September with a third-round Kimura in a fight fraught with controversy, as there were ghost fouls, a serious botch by the referee, but nonetheless, he hung on to win the fight, stretching that streak to 3. Prior to that, he beat Kadis Ibragimov at UFC Fight Night Magomed Sharipov versus Cater back in November of 2019. And before that, he knocked out Patrick Cummins back in May of 2019 at UFC Fight Night Dos Anjos versus Lee. Despite that 3-fight winning streak, Herman is quite the underdog here. Menifield is out there at -240. You can get Herman at +200 as the underdog. Lev, is that a righteous line? Is there any value there on either side? And who have you got winning this one and how?
There might be some value on Menifield at -240. I mean, give all the credit in the world to Ed Herman. He, as you say, a very unlikely free fight winning streak, even if it really should have been a KO loss against Mike Rodriguez, if not for Chris Taioni totally ruining that fight. But nevertheless, yeah, he's very, very slow, Ed Herman. He, pound for pound, might be the slowest guy in the entire UFC right now. You can just
let me stop you for just a moment.
Yeah.
I'm gonna interject, like I'm gonna call an audible here, because okay, as you point out, Ed Herman, even during his athletic prime, like even 10 years ago, was one of the slowest pound for pound fighters in the UFC. He is now pushing his 41st birthday. Is this the starkest difference in just pure raw athleticism between two people in a UFC fight ever? You've got a guy who looks like an NFL strong safety against Ed Herman.
It's hard to say. I mean, physically, I think actually Ed Herman has always been a strong guy, and he's physically strong even now. It's hard to say. I'm sure we can come up with other examples from the years, right?
Well, every Roxanne Modafferi fight, but yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
That was what I was thinking of too.
And of course, Herman has spent the bulk of his UFC career at 185 is another factor. But yeah, sorry for the interruption. Please go ahead.
Yeah, and he's managed to win these fights because he, in a lot of cases, he's able to take advantage of guys who don't have very good cardio. That was the case with Mike Rodriguez. It was certainly the case with Hadis Ibragimov. And he still throws very powerful strikes in the clinch. However, he's just slow. He takes shots, and against Menifield, I don't really think he can exploit Menifield's weaknesses, I should say. Yeah, Menifield also has some cardio problems. His fight IQ is definitely questionable. A lot of times he'll hurt guys striking, and then he'll just clinch with them for long periods of time. So I can see why some people might choose Herman, but in this particular case, I think Menifield, he's very hard to take down. Actually, his takedown defense is pretty solid. He does manage to defend himself well enough in the clinch, and beyond that, I just don't see Ed Herman eating his blows. Yeah, he was able to maybe like eat some blows from Hadis Ibragimov, and he should have lost by knockout to Mike Rodriguez, but Menifield hits very, very hard in round one. He's very dangerous in round one, and I just don't even see Ed Herman surviving that, especially because Menifield does have good takedown defense and is also pretty dangerous if you get him on top, which are not qualities that Mike Rodriguez had either. So, I mean, yeah, you can think of some scenario where Ed Herman manages to really take the fight late, and Menifield just, his cardio completely gives out. But I think 80 to 90% of the time, it's just Menifield knockout victory in round one.
That's perfect. pulling the curtain back a little bit for viewers, especially those who aren't as familiar with Lev. Lev, on top of being an analyst, one of our play-by-play guys, an op-ed writer, he is a bit of a mixed martial arts investor, and so he has a much better eye for odds than I do. But I will say this: if this thing goes past 2 minutes, I start feeling better and better about Ed Herman. When someone is at least like an over 2-1 favorite, if I'm looking for value, I'm looking at the underdog and I'm saying, okay, what are his plausible avenues to victory and how plausible are they really? And yes, Ed Herman probably should have lost to Mike Rodriguez, but Alonzo Menifield, he beat Fabio Cherant, and the jury's still out over whether Fabio Cherant is a UFC level fighter. Prior to that, his losses to Ovince St. Preux and Devin Clark showed some alarming deficiencies. In his loss to Devin Clark, that was one of the worst displays of cardio I've ever seen at the UFC level from a non-heavyweight. And then going from that into the OSP fight, I felt better about Menifield there just because the other worst display of cardio I've ever seen from a non-heavyweight in the UFC fight, in the modern era, was OSP in the Krylov rematch. So I was like, well, maybe both these guys will need the oxygen tank at the end of the second round. But instead, Menifield came out much more measured. He came out as if he just said, I am not going to gas out in this fight. And instead, he just lost a firefight. He hurt OSP. OSP hurt him. They went back and forth. And despite Menifield being younger, faster, and probably comparably as strong, he's the one that got knocked out. Those show avenues to victory for somebody to beat Alonzo Menifield. Just the question is whether it's Ed Herman. Herman's chin is not what it once was, not at 205 or 185. His chin can't get him through the battles that it did in his heyday. But his cardio is still good, as you pointed out. While he is super slow of hand and foot, he remains pretty kinetic on the ground. If you get on the ground with him, he still is pretty quick in transition. He's a good grappler. If this goes past the first round, I'm looking at the live odds in this thing. Even if Menifield wins the first round, even if he hurts Herman, if this thing gets to the end of the first round, I'm looking real hard at the live odds on Ed Herman. The question is just, do I think it's going to make it to the end of the first round? If Keith were here, he'd be ranting and raving saying, this is my upset special, and he'd somehow magically be right about it. I'm not as smart as Lev. I'm not as brave as Keith. Well, I'm not as smart as Keith either, probably. I'm too chicken. I would love to see Ed Herman's unlikely success story, just power on. But, ultimately, if he wins this, he's won 4 in a row, and he's going to get a real contender in his next fight, and that's going to be ugly. So maybe this is the most merciful way for this little adventure to end. But I'm with you. Menifield's going to catch him with something early on. Herman's not going to be able to recover quite like he, once did or once would have. So he gets tagged, shoots a desperation single, and this thing probably ends with Menifield just hammer fisting him in the side of the head against the fence 15 times until the ref comes in and waves it off. It'll be kind of sad, but everything we've gotten from Ed Herman in the last 5 years, frankly, is just, icing on the cake. It's been a fun career. He's been open himself about it's getting close to the end. I hope he actually was able to, get into the UFC video game so that his son could play him. I'll never forget him asking that. Don't ask for bonuses. Ask to get in the UFC video game so that your teenage kids can be you. That's a heartwarming story right there. But this fight will not be a heartwarming story. This is Alonzo Menifield by first round knockout. Second from the top of the UFC 265 prelims is a matchup of two young bantamweights, definitely in need of a UFC win. It is Vince Morales versus Drako Rodriguez. Morales, the 30-year-old from Idaho, is 9-5 overall. He's 1-3 in the UFC. Fought most recently all the way back last May, where Chris Gutierrez kicked his legs out from underneath him at UFC on ESPN Woodley versus Burns. Previous to that, he dropped a unanimous decision to Benito Lopez all the way back in July of 2019. His lone UFC win was in May of that year over Ayman Zahabi, and he lost to Yadong Song, who appears later on this card in his UFC debut all the way back in 2018. He's taking on Rodriguez. The 25-year-old from Iowa is 7-2 overall. He's 0-1 in the UFC since joining out of the 2020 version of Dana White's Contender Series. He lost to Zahabi via first round knockout at UFC Fight Night Blades versus Lewis back in February. Odds on this one close to a pick'em, but Rodriguez is just a very slight favorite. He's minus 115. Morales not quite in the even money, but he is as low as minus 105 if you like him. Lev, who do you have winning this one? How do you think the fight looks?
I think it's actually a very fascinating fight. Vince Morales, he's a lot better than you may think just looking at his record. To begin with, the fight against Benito Lopez was a huge robbery. Every single media outlet had Morales winning. In fact, many had him winning 30-27. So that was like an absolutely horrendous robbery. And the interesting thing about Vince Morales is he has a lot of, well, shouldn't say a lot, but he has some very high-level skills. His footwork is excellent. His movement is excellent. His defense is like good. And initially I was looking at this like, man, these are like skills you don't even see out of like top contenders and even some of the world champions, right? So, but what really holds him back is that offensively, he's just very lacking. From a technical standpoint, his boxing is decent, but his hands just completely lack power, and his kicks are even worse. They're like telegraphed and very, very weak. So he's a very hard guy to hit. He moves beautifully. Like, again, he does have like some technical boxing, but he just doesn't have any punching power. His kicks are weak, and he does have a weakness to leg kicks, which was exploited by Chris Gutierrez, and which will be a problem against Drako Rodriguez, who has pretty powerful heavy leg kicks. Drako Rodriguez, he has some skills. Actually, his own footwork is pretty good. Not as good as Morales's, but also pretty good. His defense, though, is much worse. He's a much easier guy to hit, and that's how he got knocked out against Ayman Zahabi. But he has a pretty heavy right cross. So it's one of those things where, yeah, his defense is worse, but is Vince Morales actually going to knock him out or hurt him? Probably not. Whereas I can definitely see over 15 minutes, Drako Rodriguez landing some heavy leg kicks, possibly landing his big right cross. And I do see him winning a decision for that matter, even though I'm very impressed by some of Vince Morales' skills when you're just not really doing damage to the opponent, right? Whereas the other opponent can absolutely inflict damage on you. It's hard to win. So I have Rodriguez by decision.
Awesome. I agree that, in terms of like their overall skill sets, these guys aren't too far apart from each other. But the fact that Rodriguez is just his striking is more damaging, and he is a finisher as a grappler, does make me lean towards him. Just every minute the fight goes on, it does favor in some ways the more dynamic finisher, out of any two fighters. Rodriguez really pinged my radar because he just destroyed one of my favorite Houston area prospect, Leonardo Martinez, on the Contender Series back in 2020. Just caught a kick, hustled him to the ground, and choked him all the way unconscious with a triangle. I don't know if he's going to do that to Vince Morales, but like on the feet, I do expect him to do damage with kicks. If it goes to the ground, I think it's probably going to go there more on Rodriguez's terms, and that will be danger zone for Morales as well. I'm going with Rodriguez here, and I'm going to go with Rodriguez by decision. Morales has shown himself pretty durable to everything but repeated leg kicks. So that's not what I'm picking to happen here. Give me Rodriguez by decision as well. The featured prelim in Houston this Saturday is a lightweight matchup between Bobby Green and Rafael Fiziev. Green, the 34-year-old Californian, is 27-11-1 overall. He's 8-6-1 in the UFC. Fought most recently on the UFC's Halloween Fight Night card, dropping a unanimous decision to Thiago Moises that snapped a 3-fight winning streak for him over Clay Guida, Lando Venata, and Alan Patrick. He's taking on Fiziev. The 28-year-old Kyrgyzstani, by way of Thailand, is 9-1 overall. He's 3-1 in the UFC. He is currently on a 3-fight win streak since dropping his Octagon debut. He has beaten Alex White, Mark Diakiese, and most recently at UFC 256 last December, Renato Moicano, whom he knocked out with punches late in the first round. Fiziev is a strong favorite here. He is minus 280 or so. You can get Green as the underdog at plus 240. Lev, are you feeling these long odds here? Do you think Fiziev has this one in the bag?
Yeah, I don't feel the long odds. I think this could be a very close, very difficult fight for Fiziev. I think Bobby Green, he's always had a ton of potential, and I think he started to really figure it out, even though he's obviously a little bit past his athletic prime and he has quite a few miles on him. But he really showed significant improvement just suddenly in his early 30s after so many fights where he didn't show any improvement, but he suddenly showed this improvement. And I want to say that there were a lot of people who thought that he actually should have beaten Thiago Moises, but that was a decision that went the wrong way. So I'm curious if the judges had given him that one, which would have been by no means a bad decision. If they went with Green, he'd be on a 4-fight winning streak, and I think these odds would be a lot closer.
Either that, or he's the guy that would have been getting bulldozed by
Makhachev.
Yeah, by Islam Makhachev, last month.
Yeah, that's possible as well. But yeah, he's really like worked on his wrestling more now, which he incorporates a lot better with his striking. He's really just concentrated on throwing nice, clean punches as opposed to I don't know, sometimes he would clown around in some of his fights. I think that's why he got knocked out against Dustin Poirier. Or using a Philly shell, which, I mean, yeah, it looks nice. I don't think it has a place in MMA, and I say this as a former amateur boxer. But yeah, he's been fighting a lot better, and I think he'll be able to probably neutralize Fiziev's grappling, and I think he will be able to certainly hold his own in the striking. He's still faster than average. He still has some nice straight punches. So I see this being a very close fight. The question is, can he win a close decision? Because he's certainly dropped a lot of close decisions in his career. You know what? Let's just let's go with one upset. I'll choose Bobby Green by decision.
Awesome. I do agree with you in that Green has all the tools to like make this a very, very difficult night for Fiziev. He's always had all the tools. I don't know if we've known each other long enough or have talked enough about this for me to have introduced you to this concept, but I do have a all-time list of Scream at the TV fighters. And
okay.
Bobby Green has been in the top 3 for close to a decade, just where
Sure.
you're screaming at the TV because of just things that they repeatedly do that are just maddening. And with Bobby Green, it is underusing his wrestling, which has always been good. Like, you know, former college wrestler, like explosive entries for his double leg and single leg, but we'll never use it. You don't know why. Maybe it just seems like too much work. It's tiring to wrestle. And then, yes, talking about the showboating on the feet, the Philly shell, the bobbing and weaving, the like pointing when he has the same problem Michael Johnson does, where he thinks that by making you miss him, he's winning rounds.
Right.
And which is why he would just drop some lousy split decisions to guys that frankly were not as skilled as him. You know, Jorge Masvidal spent some years on the Scream at the TV team because he would do the same thing. Right. You know, he really did seem to have kind of turned that corner on the 3-fight winning streak. It wasn't over the highest level guys on the planet, you know, Guida, the Venata rematch, and Patrick, but just the fact that he didn't lose any of them by doing dumb stuff was a very heartening sign. You know, then he got Moises, who's a legit elite fighter and arguably could have won that fight. But again, if he lost, it's not because he did dumb stuff. It's just because Moises was a better fighter. Against Fiziev, man, I mean, we're talking about a guy that only has 10 career fights, mostly because he's too busy being the Muay Thai instructor at Tiger Muay Thai. Like, that says a lot for like his striking skills. Even if this is like the new improved Bobby Green, you know, the third act Bobby Green, I worry that this is the wrong guy for him. You know, Fiziev is fast. He hits hard. All of his strikes have power, good footwork. He's defensively sound. Like, Green would have to fight a smart fight for 3 rounds to beat him. And while I am super tempted to take the upset here, and I know that you're like being the ballsy one and like going out on the limb here, I am going to be like the boring square and say that Fiziev does pull this out. But I'm going to say that this makes it to the final horn. You know, Green has remained durable. He's always been pretty durable, and I'm going to say he has his moments, but he does lose a decision here.
One little fun fact for you. Bobby Green was actually a pretty big favorite against Thiago Moises. He was like a minus 300 favorite in that fight. So it really shows you how quickly like people's confidence can turn. Although part of that is just the massive amount of respect they have in Fiziev, especially after he knocked out Moicano in 1 round. And
now that I think about it, that fight was a bit of a coming out party for Moises. You know,
yeah.
But I did not remember the odds being that wide. That is, wow. The 5-fight main card of UFC 265 kicks off with a bantamweight matchup between Yadong Song and Casey Kenney. Song, the 23-year-old Chinese fighter by way of Sacramento, is 16-5-1 with 1 no contest overall. He is 4-1-1 in the UFC. He's 3-1-1 in the UFC at bantamweight, since he did have a lone win at featherweight over Marlon Vera last year. He lost his last fight. It was back in March. He dropped a unanimous decision to Kyler Phillips at UFC 259, the first real blemish on his UFC ledger. He's taking on Kenney. The 30-year-old Arizonan is 16-3-1 overall. He's 5-2 in the UFC. He fought most recently in March at UFC 259 as well, dropping a split decision to former champ Dominic Cruz. That ended a 3-fight win streak for him over Louis Smolka, Alateng Haley, and Nathaniel Wood. Odds on this one fairly close, but Kenney is the favorite right now. He is minus 120 or so. You can get Song at even money and maybe even plus 102 or so. Uh, I write, for those who don't know, I write a fight week column for Sherdog called Stand and Deliver that focuses on 3 or 4 fighters on the upcoming card who are under a little additional pressure or under a little more pressure to perform in this fight than just the strict wins and losses would seem to indicate. And usually it's one fighter on one side of, the fight. Like, for example, one of the ones this week was Ciryl Gane. And I'll explain when we get to that fight why I think he's under more pressure to win than Derrick Lewis is. This one was a rare case of me putting both fighters in a single fight on the list. And the reason is, as bantamweight just goes through the roof, it's such a division on the rise right now. I don't think it's the best division in the UFC. Don't let the UFC booth tell you that. It's not true, but it is a rapidly improving division with just a huge influx of young talent. At the same time that there are still some legends at the top that are, still relatively close to their prime. This is all of a sudden becoming a really, really hard division to even get on the radar of like the top 10 or top 15. And in Song and Kenney, we've got 2 guys. They're coming off a loss, but neither of them are terrible losses. The story of the Kenney versus Cruz fight was mostly how good Cruz looked for most people I talked to. It wasn't that Kenney laid an egg. It was just everyone was surprised to see how good Dominic Cruz looked in that fight. And similarly, Song, he lost to Phillips, but if Phillips keeps panning out like the prospect I think he is, that's a loss that probably will age pretty well in the long run. What neither of these guys can afford is 2 in a row. And all you need to know about that is that Merab Dvalishvili, who is on a 6-fight winning streak in this division that really should be 7 because he was robbed in that no-tap technical submission by Ricky Simon. He should be on a 7-fight win streak. He is constantly bouncing in and out of the Sherdog top 15 at bantamweight. That's how hard it is to get ranked in this division. A guy that is on a 6-fight win streak that should be 7, can't even stay in the top 15. Both of these are young guys, but whoever loses, it's the kind of division where a single loss will set you back for a long, long time. And in that dynamic, it's becoming kind of like lightweight and welterweight. Look no further than Vicente Luque, who fights further up this card, for a guy who will win 5, 6 fights in a row, lose 1 at the wrong time, and it'll send him all the way to the back of the line. That's going to happen to one of these guys. That's the kind of Shark Tank this division is becoming. What I'm going to ask you, Lev, is who takes the L this weekend?
Well, the question is, will the judges actually score this fight correctly? Because the way I'm looking at it, Song Yadong, he's lost 3 fights in a row. He lost to Cody Stamann on the fact that it was a majority draw is absolutely insane. Cody Stamann 100% won that fight. I don't know how much clearer that one could have been. Then he fights Marlon Chito Vera. Marlon Vera clearly wins rounds 2 and round 3, and yet the judges give it to Song Yadong. Finally, against Kyler Phillips, he loses in such a one-sided manner that they incredibly actually do give the fight to the other guy. But he's lost 3 fights in a row, and you can speculate why it is that judges keep giving him either a draw or a win that he absolutely in no way deserves. But in terms of his actual performance in the cage, he's on a 3 fight losing streak. And I think if the judges call this fight fairly, then it should be a very clear victory for Casey Kenney, who I think is substantially more skilled. What does Song Yadong do? Song Yadong has good boxing. He has good technical boxing. He can throw hard punches, right? He's a little bit slow against the better strikers in the division. He does not incorporate kicks very well. He does have takedown defense, but that takedown defense does diminish itself round by round, which we saw against Cody Stamann, who was finally able to get him down in round 3 and eventually dominate him. And he's also a very large, muscular bantamweight, so he has some cardio issues. Kenney has really good cardio. He is pretty quick for the division, and he also incorporates his kicks a lot better. So I can maybe see, not even necessarily, but maybe Song Yadong can win round one. I think Kenney should very much have a large advantage in rounds 2 and 3. The only question is, what are the judges going to do? Is it going to be like the Marlon Vera fight where Song Yadong loses, but they give him the decision win anyway? But if not, my choice is absolutely Kenney by decision.
That's a fantastic breakdown. When I look at Kenney, I also think he is you know, a good wrestler, and the times he's had a really hard time are when he's not proven to be the better wrestler in the cage that night. I mean, when you're talking about Merab and Dominic Cruz, I mean, Merab was able to take Kenney down, and then Kenney was not able to take Cruz down sometimes when I think he would have liked to. Both times that worked against him. If he decides to just embrace his inner wrestler and take Song down early and often, I think this is definitely his fight to lose. Kenney's, I don't want to call it a flaw because I love it in him, but his willingness and eagerness to get into crowd pleasing scraps, if he indulges that can lead to some hard to score rounds. We have seen what the judges do with hard to score rounds, and some even not very hard to score rounds when it comes to Song Yadong. So I am going to pick Kenney to do the smart thing here, and take Song down, tire him out, wear him out, and just win this thing going away. But if he decides to test his fortunes on the feet, this might be, they might win fight of the night, but he might not get his win bonus. So we'll see. But I'm going with Kenney by decision here as well, and I hope and kind of expect that it will be a wrestling heavy decision.
I will say about Kenney, he was definitely in a big wrestling disadvantage against Manny Bermudez, because Manny Bermudez was 1.5 to 2 weight classes higher than him. And Manny Bermudez did take him down a number of times that fight. Kenney, he still managed to win. Like, I remember watching that fight and going, wow, this guy has unbelievable heart and grit, right? Here he is, like, so much smaller than this guy. Like, it was a striking size disadvantage if you just watch him in the cage. And he wasn't intimidated by it at all. He still found a way to win. It was very impressive. And I want to say, actually, Nathaniel Wood, who's a good wrestler, is at least as good of a wrestler as Kenney was. So he's definitely shown an ability to beat guys who are as good or even better than him in terms of wrestling.
Those are good points. Like, yeah, well taken. We head now to the strawweight division for a rematch. 6 years in the making. It is Tecia Torres versus Angela Hill 2. Torres, the 31-year-old American top team stalwart, is 12-5 overall. She's 8-5 in the UFC. She is on a 2-fight winning streak currently over Sam Hughes, whom she beat bloody and into a doctor stoppage between rounds at UFC 256 last December. Prior to that, she took a unanimous decision over Brianna Van Buren last June. That snapped a 4-fight losing streak for her, which had led many observers, myself frankly included, to pronounce her career, at least as a factor in the division, over. Those reports turn out to have been somewhat premature, as, again, she's won back-to-back fights and looked very good in doing so. She is taking on Hill, the 36-year-old Marylander by way of San Diego, is 13-9 overall. She's 8-9 in the UFC. She won her last outing, taking a unanimous decision over Ashley Yoder in March at UFC Fight Night Edwards versus Muhammad. That snapped a 2-fight losing streak for her, both of them via split decision to Michelle Waterson last September and Claudia Gadelha last May. And before Lev snakes me on this one, I thought she won the Gadelha fight. At any rate, Torres, the slight favorite here. She is minus 135. If you like Angie Overkill, you can get her at plus 115 on the comeback. Lev Hill, a longtime resident of my Scream at the TV list. But tell me who you like in this one, the resurgent Torres or the ever mercurial Hill?
Well, I'm not sure she's an ever mercurial Hill because I think she's massively improved ever since her win over Carnelossi. She's really just improved her skills in every area in terms of her wrestling, her takedown defense, her ground game, her striking. She fights a lot smarter, like just a really huge improvement in every regard. However, Tecia Torres, she really surprised me as well because after quite a bit of stagnation, she just looked like a completely different fighter against Brianna Van Buren. And I was actually really high on Brianna Van Buren. I think she's like a tremendously skilled fighter who's just a little too short and lacks reach for the division. But Tecia Torres is only like a little bit taller and only has a little bit more reach on her. So I was really impressed when Tecia Torres just really dominated that fight, just showed a massive improvement in her striking ability. And then obviously against Sam Hughes just stopped her. It's interesting because before that Brianna Van Buren fight, I would have chosen Angela Hill. I would think her striking is better, more technical. But actually, after the significant improvement I saw against Brianna Van Buren, I'm actually choosing Tecia Torres. The reason being is that Tecia Torres has really good cardio. And Angela Hill, she's worked on her cardio, but it's still something that is a relative weakness. And with her now getting up there a little in age, she's 36, it's going to become more of a factor. Like, for instance, when Angela Hill fought Michelle Waterston, she clearly won the first 2 rounds. But then, she slowed down and allowed Waterston to win that split decision. And I understand that this is only 3 rounds, it's not 5 rounds, but with round 1 and at least the first half of round 2 probably being at least pretty close with the improvements we see with Tecia Torres, her cardio is going to give her an advantage over the second half of round 2 and possibly just win round 3 for her. And that's very significant, especially in what I anticipate to be a striking battle, because I think I don't see Torres having enough wrestling to get Hill down. And as a result, that's why I see Torres winning the decision. Her cardio is just better, and I don't think Hill, if she has any superiority in the striking, it's enough to make up for that.
I see this as a really close matchup, and I feel as though it hinges on all the things that you kind of pointed out. I look forward to seeing the contrast in striking. Hill is, very much a Muay Thai flavored striker. I think she's most comfortable and functions her best when, she's allowed to dictate distance, despite not being a super tall strawweight. She fights pretty rangy. She fights behind a jab. She has some nice long kicks. And even though her clinch is good, I think she prefers it when people don't crowd her. So I'm interested in the dynamic of Torres, who will need to come forward to get within her preferred range, and certainly is not averse to clinching and kind of using her strength and low center of gravity. And the dynamic regarding the cardio is exactly what you say. The tiny tornado is the perfect nickname for Tecia Torres, who is short, high volume striker, like a little whirlwind, and tends to be like just a little Energizer bunny of cardio. I am banking on Hill's cardio having continued to improve, and even though I see this fight hinging on the same things that you do, I am going to bank on Hill's cardio being improved enough to, if not win the third round, at least perhaps win the first two and keep the wheels from completely falling off the wagon in the third. So I'm going to go with the very slight upset here and go with Hill by decision. Third from the top, we have a high stakes welterweight matchup between Michael Maverick Chiesa and Vicente, the silent assassin Luque. Chiesa, the 33-year-old from Washington State, is 18-4 overall. He is 11-4 since joining the UFC as the winner of season 16 of The Ultimate Fighter. More specifically, he is 4-1, I believe, since moving up to welterweight after several years of being the most ludicrously Titanic lightweight on roster. He takes on he's on a 4-fight winning streak. Probably ought to mention that, considering I just talked about how many fights you have to win in a row to even get ranked at welterweight. He has defeated Carlos Condit, Diego Sanchez, Rafael dos Anjos, and most recently, back in January, Neil Magny, whom he defeated via unanimous decision in the headliner of UFC on ESPN 20, thus vaulting himself unambiguously, into the welterweight top 10. He faces Luque, the 29-year-old Brazilian by way of South Florida, is 27-1 overall. He is 13-3 since joining the UFC as a standout from season 21 of The Ultimate Fighter. He is on a 3-fight winning streak of his own, having defeated Nico Price and Randy Brown last year, both of them in absolutely sensational barn burners, and then defeated former champ Tyron Woodley back in March via first round Darce choke. And it was at least the most exciting Tyron Woodley fight in a while. Odds on this one are dead even as of Wednesday of fight week. You can get both gentlemen at -110. Lev, who do you like in this one? And do you think either of them has realistic potential to make a run up the rankings once they get a boost off the other man's shoulders?
Well, it's an interesting fight because Michael Chiesa, his grappling is just tremendous. He has such a great mix of both wrestling and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but not just that, his top control and just how fluid he is and going from one position to another. It's just fantastic to watch. He's probably one of the best grapplers in all of MMA, quite frankly. He's really that impressive. And he's really good in terms of beating dangerous strikers who have good grappling of their own. I mean, he beat Rafael dos Anjos that way. So, yeah, it's very tough, and I think the odds are very reasonable. And yet, Vicente Luque is a very hard opponent for him to face because Vicente Luque does have very good grappling of his own. He's got good wrestling. He's got good takedown defense. When I know this was a few years ago and both guys have improved, but when Luque fought Leon Edwards, Leon Edwards is a guy with very good wrestling as well, very underrated wrestling. He out-wrestled Rafael dos Anjos as well. It was actually Luque who I think had a very slight wrestling advantage. Now, if Luque does get on his back, he is a little bit limited there, although he does post up very nicely, which he did when he was briefly taken down by Randy Brown. But yeah, his wrestling and his takedown defense is just really solid. And I do think he does have a very large striking advantage. And it's also the kind of advantage where I do think Chiesa could be in some trouble if he doesn't get him down more quickly. Chiesa does have a cardio advantage, so yeah, it's tough. There's certainly a very good argument for Chiesa, but in situations like this where a guy is so solid, a grappler would really have to be just either sensational or have less of a weakness on the feet for me to choose them. So ultimately, I will choose Luque, and let's even go with knockout.
I was like hoping to be the only one of us that saw this way, but clearly you're on the same wavelength I am. Vicente Luque, I've had to revise my thinking about him because a few years ago, he was already one of the more reliable action fighters in the welterweight division. Like over the course of about 2 years, he and Niko Price and Randy Brown they basically had a round robin where they all fought each other at least once. And now at this point, Luque and Price have fought twice, and all of them were like fight of the night candidates. They were some of the most just wild, entertaining scraps. And Luque came out on top of those. He definitely came out above Brown and Price in those, but he just struck me as a guy that would never quite string together enough wins in such a murderous division to actually make a run at contention. And all of a sudden he is. And I mean, I'm happy for that. Like, he's one of the nicest dudes in the sport, and he's remained very entertaining even as he's like started beating higher and higher level fighters. But what you pointed out, his strengths and Chiesa's weaknesses do not match up well for Chiesa, and vice versa. Like, Chiesa's strengths don't provide him, I think, as obvious or easy an avenue to victory as Luque's do against him. Chiesa, he's a good offensive striker, but he's always been hittable, always been vulnerable. He's been hurt to the body quite a few times. Luque is definitely capable of testing him to the body. If it stays on the feet, Luque has just a tremendous advantage in power. He throws a greater variety of strikes. And if it goes to the ground, he's not a complete slouch there either. I mean, he trained, Vale Tudo before he even trained BJJ, but he's trained both from a young teenager. It's just not something that gets shown very often because he gets in so many wild, entertaining slugfests. Chiesa can finish this if it goes to the ground. He is, there are a lot of black belts in the UFC, but Michael Chiesa has always been the kind of guy that victimizes even other supposedly very good grapplers, just because he's an absolutely venomous offensive grappler. And he's not quite there, but he's on the shelf just right beneath like Damian Maia and Jussier Formiga as like just some of the greatest back control specialists in UFC history. Especially in the early run of his career when he was at lightweight, he destroyed so many guys by taking their back effortlessly, locking in a triangle and choking them. I was wondering if that would remain the case when he moved up to welterweight. Would he be able to do it on UFC welterweights? Thus far, he's been just fine. I mean, Condit and Sanchez were obviously both well past their prime when he beat them, but he absolutely bullied both those guys on the ground, and both of those guys are very good grapplers. And in both cases, he ended up in situations where he did things to them, got them in positions using one arm that most grapplers would need two arms to do. Like, I swear against Sanchez, or no, I think it was against Condit. He had him like a hammerlock, basically.
Yes,
I was like,
yes.
like, how is Carlos Condit being just completely big brothered like this? I can't get that out of my mind. Like, if it goes to the ground, as good as Luque is, Chiesa could certainly do that to him, but I don't think it's going to get there. I think Chiesa is going to start getting the worst of things on the feet pretty quickly. And while he is a good, he's a good wrestler, he's found ways to get fights to the ground. He doesn't have a great, just fast entry shot, a collegiate wrestler convert. Yeah, I think Luque is going to hurt him, maybe even hurt him early, and Chiesa is going to take just too much fire on the way and either get knocked out on the feet or dropped and finished on the ground. I'm picking Luque by first round knockout, and it's not an indication that I think Luque is that much better than Chiesa. I think they're both top 10 quality guys. It's just the way their strengths and weaknesses match up with each other. But I'm with you, Luque by knockout.
And actually, you had asked me earlier in terms of these guys as contenders. While I think they're both excellent fighters, I don't see either of them as serious contenders. I think Usman absolutely destroys both of them. I think Colby Covington absolutely destroys both of them. I think Leon Edwards has maybe a little bit of trouble with Chiesa, but I think most likely he significantly outpoints both of them as well. I think he's improved a lot since his first fight against Vicente Luque. So unfortunately, I don't see them really doing much against the top of the division.
It is a murderous division. It's tough. Yeah. You have to win 5 or 6, unless you're someone like Chiesa who came over already as a top 10 fighter from another division. If you're just working your way up from the bottom, like Luque had to, you have to win 5, 6, 7 fights in a row, even to get a look from the top 15. And the sledding doesn't get any easier from there. As you pointed out, the top 5 of this division is just absolutely brutal. Tough place to work.
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of tough, I said off the top that Chiesa was a veteran of the Ultimate Fighter 16. That's not true. It's the Ultimate Fighter 15. It's Magny who won or who came out of Tough 16. Anyway, just so the comment section doesn't come get me. That brings us to the co-main event of UFC 265, a bantamweight matchup between former featherweight champ Jose Aldo and rising contender Pedro Munoz. Aldo, the 34-year-old Brazilian, is 29-7 overall. He is 11-6 in the UFC. He is 19-6 across his UFC and legendary WEC careers. He is currently won his last fight, taking a unanimous decision over Marlon Vera at UFC Fight Night Thompson versus Neal last December. That snapped a 3-fight losing streak that had spurred his move from the featherweight division down to bantamweight, though in fairness to him, those were losses to Alexander Volkanovski, your current top featherweight in the world, Marlon Moraes in a fight that many thought he won, and then a fight that at least started out competitive against Petr Yan at UFC 251 last July. He's taking on Munoz, who is 2 days older. They both turned 35 in early September, but he is a 34-year-old from Sao Paulo. He is 19-5 with 1 no contest overall. He is 9-5 with 1 no contest in the UFC. He also won his last fight, taking a unanimous decision over Jimmy Rivera at UFC Fight Night Rosenstrike versus Gane in February. That snapped a 2-fight skid for him, in which he had lost a unanimous decision to Aljamain Sterling and a split decision to Frankie Edgar, which took place in the headliner of UFC on ESPN 15 last August. This one, like several other fights on this card, is basically a pick'em right now. As of when I looked this morning, both men were minus 110. I'm not sure if that line has moved, but at any rate, this is a real close one on paper. Lev, who have you got and how?
Well, you just stunned me with that little factoid that actually Jose Aldo is 2 days younger than Pedro Munoz. I didn't realize Pedro Munoz was actually right around that same age. That really took me back. Not that it changes my analysis, but
no, before someone told me that, and I think I first found that out a couple weeks ago. I would have assumed that Aldo was 4 or 5 years older, just based on the tread off the tires, and also based on the fact that Aldo was front and center on our radar from the time he was 23 years old as part of it. But yeah. It's shocking.
But in this fight, I would say that the current Jose Aldo, has a lot of similarities to Pedro Munoz. They throw very powerful technical punches. They're largely boxers. I don't see a lot of grappling in this one, even though both are very good grapplers, and Jose Aldo used that to win round 3 against Marlon Vera. But just in terms of the striking, I see Pedro Munoz as having a much more reliable chin. We've seen Jose Aldo get hurt pretty early against Marlon Moraes, and I would say that Pedro Munoz early is about as dangerous as Marlon Moraes is. I also think that perhaps Munoz might have a slight cardio advantage. We have seen Aldo fade a little bit even into round 3. So they have very similar qualities where they're both largely these very powerful, technical, precise boxers. But it's just that Munoz has like some advantages due to less miles on him, this being more of a natural weight class for him. So just that combination of a sturdier chin, slightly better cardio, and maybe even at this point slightly better defense, I think he should be favored. I actually know that Munoz, he started out as more of an underdog. I think he started out as like plus 120. So it seems a lot of people have a similar idea since it's now swung to even odds. I'll go with Munoz by decision.
I mean, I should probably mention here, and I imagine you feel somewhat the same about this, that the notion that Aldo could drop to bantamweight at the stage of his career when he did, and even be competitive against the top guys in the world, was a bit shocking.
Yeah. Well, he's one of the greatest fighters ever. Possibly even like a top 5 fighter of all time. Of course, it completely depends on your criteria, but he's just such an unbelievable legend. He's so great, and it's just another testament to how great Jose Aldo was, that he managed to do it, and he arguably beat Marlon Moraes. He won round 2 against Petr Yan, who's just so phenomenal, right? And gave him a tough fight, and then beat a very, very good fighter in Marlon Vera.
Yes, because as you point out, he's an absolute legend. Depending on your criteria, he could certainly be one of the 5 most accomplished fighters we've ever seen. I still think he's the greatest featherweight of all time.
Me too.
But if there's one thing that, even in his absolute heyday, when he slaughtered everyone in the WEC, slaughtered his first 6 or 7 opponents in the UFC, the one thing I never thought was this guy could drop to bantamweight, because the one problem was that he had an obviously hard weight cut. He looked like death warmed over on the scale. And if anything, I thought he'd be moving up to 155 by this point in his career. Instead, he moved down, and instead of just dehydrating himself to death, has actually rebuilt his body. It's in some ways one of the most impressive things he's done, because for once he didn't make it look easy. Like, this is something that obviously took planning and enormous amounts of effort and discipline to do, and in many ways did not rely on his natural tools and skill set. He just did a very hard thing to stay competitive and relevant at this point in his career. Like, all props to Jose Aldo. Another thing about Jose Aldo during, especially like the WEC and early UFC part of his career, is that you describe him quite accurately as a crisp and powerful boxer now, but there was a time when his leg kicks were the single most dangerous part of his game, and he seemed to abandon those entirely, or almost entirely, for most of his later UFC run. They put an appearance back in the Vera fight. It wasn't vintage Aldo, where it was just like kick your legs until you can't stand it anymore, and then you make a mistake and he knocks you out. But it was the first time in a long time I had seen his leg kicks actually affect the flow of the fight. Like his leg kicks made Vera make adjustments that then let Aldo win the fight. That was the first time he'd done that in several years. If he does that against Munoz, I think the tenor of this fight changes. Because if they just engage in a boxing-heavy kickboxing match, I do think Munoz is going to get the better of it. He's a relatively fast starter. Aldo used to be an incredibly fast starter. It really isn't anymore. And I could see Munoz just either, socking away the first 2 rounds or even hurting Aldo and finishing this. If Aldo starts leaning on his leg kicks, that changes everything. I just don't know if I trust him to do so. So even though these guys are, even on the odds, I see this as probably a pretty straightforward win for Munoz, and definitely a huge name on his ledger, a level up moment for him in this very crowded top 10, top 5 of the bantamweight division, because Aldo is still a great win right now, not just a great name, and I'm going with Munoz by decision.
I will add just one thing, which is another interesting wrinkle, is that Munoz has extremely good calf kicks of his own. And he also has an absolutely devastating front kick, actually maybe one of the best in all of MMA. He didn't get a chance to use that so much in his last fight because of all the side-to-side movement. But I do think that if Jose Aldo does try to engage him with just standing in front of him and throwing powerful shots, which Frankie Edgar was very smart not to do. He did not go toe-to-toe with him. I actually think Munoz won that fight anyway, but regardless, I think if he does plant his feet and stay in front of him and try to throw leg kicks of his own, I think Munoz has a very good chance of winning against him in terms of kicks, because his kicks are absolutely tremendous as well.
Well, and I'm glad you bring that up, because it adds another layer to this dynamic, because I mentioned the Vera fight. Aldo didn't really start out throwing a lot of kicks. Like, it was Vera who started throwing kicks, and then Aldo was like, I don't like this, I'm going to start kicking you back, and that kind of changed the tide. Makes you wonder, like, will Aldo come out not really planning on throwing kicks, and just if Munoz doesn't throw any, this just becomes mostly a boxing match? Is he going to try to lean into that, seeing how well it helped him against Vera, or will he get into a kicking contest if Munoz starts one? Like, I just have no idea, like, what Aldo's game plan looks like, or what adjustments he'll make. But yeah, it's fascinating, and I think we'll learn a lot probably within just the first 90 seconds to 2 minutes of the fight.
Yeah.
That's 12 fights down, and we arrive at the main event. It is 5 rounds of scheduled heavyweight action for the interim title between Derrick the Black Beast Lewis and Ciryl Bongaman Gane. Lewis, the 36-year-old Houston native, is 25-7 with 1 no contest overall. He is 15-5 with 1 no contest in the UFC. He's on a 4-fight winning streak, stretching all the way back to fall of 2019. Most recently, he defeated Curtis Blades at UFC Fight Night 185 back in February, knocking him out really with a single hellacious uppercut early in the second round of their fight, after being on the receiving end of Blades's trademark wrestling for much of the first. Prior to that, he knocked out Alexei Oleinik early in the second round of their fight, after flirting with danger on the ground with Oleinik for most of the first. Before that, he took somewhat more prosaic decisions over Ilir Latifi and Blagoy Ivanov. He's taking on Gane, the undefeated prospect, now contender, now possible champ, is 31 years old, born in Paris. He is a perfect 9-0 overall. He's a perfect 6-0 in the UFC. Fought just 6 weeks ago, taking a one-sided unanimous decision over Alexander Volkov in the headliner of UFC Fight Night 190. Prior to that, he took a similarly one-sided decision over Jairzinho Rozenstruik in the headliner of UFC Fight Night 186 back in February. Before that, knocked out Junior Dos Santos in the second round. Before that, Tanner Boser, Dontel Mays, and Rafael Pessoa round out his undefeated UFC slate. Gane, despite being the younger, less experienced fighter, definitely massive favorite here, biggest favorite on the card. Currently out there around minus 375 and trending further in that direction as Lewis is out there plus 310, plus 320 or so as the underdog. On my own like non-Sherdog weekly podcast, Unleashed, which you have guested on before, Lev, I delivered on Monday night an impromptu rant that, if it had been written, probably would have been titled "Everything You Think You Know About Derrick Lewis's Game Is a Lie." I will kind of throw it out here. I cannot believe that Derrick Lewis, or I cannot believe that Ciryl Gane is almost a 4-1 favorite over Derrick Lewis. I would argue that there is not an active heavyweight on the planet who should be a 4-1 favorite over Derrick Lewis right now. I think his game is kind of misunderstood, and it's intentionally misunderstood. There's a bit of crazy like a fox there. Like he presents himself as this kind of, silly, jokey, lazy guy. One, because he is silly and jokey and probably a little bit lazy, but two, because it invites people to underestimate him. People think of him as, just a brawling slugger. That's not entirely accurate. He throws flying knees. He throws some very untelegraphed head kicks. People think of him as this kind of, barrel-chested guy who looks perhaps not to be in the best of shape. That's not, even if it's accurate, it's not the whole story. At this point, he is the UFC heavyweight division's all-time leader in knockouts, but for several years now, he's already been the heavyweight division's all-time leader in knockouts in the third round or later. He has eclipsed Yoel Romero as the gold standard of the fighter who continues to throw effective fight-ending offense late in fights after he already looks tired. He presents as a guy who just wants to slug it out on the feet. First one that shoots a dusty bitch. While I'm sure he would prefer to slug it out on the feet, he's not helpless on the ground. It's not that he is any kind of conventional wrestler or grappler. It's just that for some reason MMA does not work on Derrick Lewis. He kind of waits a few minutes, he bench presses you off, and he stands back up, unless you're Daniel Cormier. But you have to go back a ways to the last time that Derrick Lewis was like losing bad fights to not good fighters. He has kind of made incremental improvements to his game, despite the fact that, he presents as someone who doesn't, take training ultra seriously. I think he's going to present Ciryl Gane with some puzzles to solve that Gane is in no way prepared for. Gane has a couple of absolutely, restaurant quality top 10 wins over Jairzinho Rozenstruik and Alexander Volkov in his last two fights. But Rozenstruik and Volkov were both like deers in headlights. I like Lewis isn't going to do that. Lewis is going to try to draw him out. Lewis will be willing to take some of his shots to try to land some of his own. And while Gane, even as relatively new to MMA as he is, he might throw a more complete arsenal of strikes than Lewis does. He hasn't exhibited the same kind of one-shot power that Lewis has. Well, nobody in the history of the heavyweight division possibly has demonstrated the same kind of one-shot power that Lewis has. But Gane, as good as he is at everything, one-shot power is probably the one like little category where he's like, average to above average for a UFC heavyweight. This is the biggest underdog on the card, but when I pick the upset here, it's not just because I'm being a homer, because hey, Houston represent. It's because I think the line is way off, And unlike some underdogs, like the underdog here has clear and demonstrable and proven routes to victory. So while I could certainly see Gane, winning a decision or even grinding down Lewis in the later rounds and getting a finish, either tapping him out or punching him out on the ground, I'm not picking it to happen. Give me Derrick Lewis by a second round knockout.
Well, that would certainly be a very exciting finish, but I think Gane, if anything, probably should maybe even be more of a favorite than he is against Derrick Lewis. Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that about Derrick Lewis. I absolutely agree with you about that. In fact, it reminds me a lot of a column I wrote, which most people didn't really care about, but it was a column about how Jairzinho Rozenstruik is very misunderstood and very underrated. How there is a very intelligent method to his unique approach to MMA, and how it's very dangerous, where Jairzinho Rozenstruik, and you can kind of say this a little bit about Lewis too, they both look very mediocre and limited right up until the moment where they knock out their opponent. And that's because Rozenstruik more so, because Lewis has won decisions. They're looking for that fight-ending sequence. They're not looking to win on points for the most part. I do think too that Ciryl Gane's fight against Jairzinho Rozenstruik is very relevant here, because Rozenstruik, I would say, has comparable power to Derrick Lewis. He also has just this monstrous random power, which he carries all throughout a fight. Perfect example being how he knocked out Alistair Overeem in the last few seconds of the 5th round. And he had been tired for many rounds at that point. In the same way that Derrick Lewis, he can be tired, hurt, right, but he still has his monstrous power as well. And Ciryl Gane, he demonstrated just a phenomenal level of fighting, where for 5 rounds, he fought very intelligently. He showed off his brilliant footwork and movement. He stayed at range. He used his jab well. He used his kicks. He would shoot takedowns to mess up with Jairzinho Rozenstruik's timing. It was an absolutely brilliant performance. And I actually think that there were certain qualities that Rozenstruik had that Derrick Lewis does not have. I think that because he's a little bit smaller, Rozenstruik is a little bit faster than Derrick Lewis. I think his kicks, they might not be as flashy, but they're more effective than Lewis's. His combinations flow a little bit better, whereas Lewis is more of a one-punch sniper. And also, Derrick Lewis, and this is a very important point in this fight, he can be hurt to the body. He's been hurt a lot of times very badly to the body. When he got knocked out by Junior Dos Santos, that was set up by him being hurt really badly to the body, for instance. And he was hurt really badly to the body against Volkov, which is a fight he was being dominated thoroughly before Volkov just did some very, very stupid things at the end of the fight that got him knocked out. And one thing we know about Ciryl Gane is he has thunderous body kicks. He will target that area very effectively. And here's the thing, a lot of people talk, oh, Derrick Lewis, he has this tremendous power, right? That's all true, but Ciryl Gane, it's not just that his defense is very good. His chin is incredibly good as well. He has one of the best chins in the heavyweight division. I'm not saying Tanner Boser is a big puncher, but he's finished guys by knockout. he had some absolutely perfect flush connects against Gane, who was still improving at that time, even though that wasn't that long ago. And they just did nothing. Like, Gane didn't react to it at all. Gane also got hit several times pretty well by Rosenstruik, who has monstrous power. Didn't affect him at all. Volkov, also a pretty big hitter. Nothing, right? So his chin is phenomenal. And I worry that even if Lewis does land a big punch, it's not going to be enough to finish him. And we've seen that because Blagoy Ivanov is a guy with a tremendous chin, right? And he ate some huge shots from Derrick Lewis, and he survived. In fact, that was a close fight. One judge even had it for Ivanov, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I just see this as being a very bad fight for Derrick Lewis. I see him getting pelted from distance. I see him getting hurt to the body. Even if he does get that perfect punch, I don't even know that that's going to be enough. So I have Gane by TKO KO at some point in the fight.
Awesome. So all the way at the top of the card, we have some pretty strongly opposed views on this high stakes main event. I'm gonna put you on the spot since we both weighed in on what we think the value of an interim title is in 2021. But regardless of that, the winner of this is the presumptive next opponent for Francis Ngannou. I won't hold you to this, but Gane versus Ngannou, what's your first impression? Who wins?
I think Gane it has the best chance out of anyone. In fact, I wrote a column saying that Ngannou is tremendous, but he's not unbeatable. And number one on the list that I thought could beat him was Gane. And interestingly enough, number two was Volkov, who Gane has already beaten soundly. So yeah, Ngannou obviously has to be the favorite. But I think Gane has a very solid chance in that fight. Absolutely.
And that would be frankly remarkable. We would be talking about Gane winning the UFC heavyweight title in his 11th professional fight. There have been a few fighters in the modern era who've gotten, title in a well-established division quicker than that. I'm not talking about, Nicco Montano winning the inaugural flyweight title, but Chris Weidman was 10-0 when he beat Anderson Silva the first time. Brock Lesnar, I think he beat Randy Couture in like his fifth or sixth fight. But
Cody Garbrandt, I think, had just a few fights when he won the championship.
Yeah, but we're talking rarefied company, and in the case of Lesnar and Weidman, we're talking about people who had a high level background in another discipline before getting into this, whereas Gane just walked into a gym at age 26, tried some kickboxing, and the coach was like, hey, you should do MMA instead. But it's not like he'd been training kickboxing for 10 years before he tried this. He's a remarkable story either way. And I mean, clearly you agree since you're picking him in this fight, but the most shocking thing to me is how poised and how intelligent he is in the cage. He just has the poise of a fighter with twice as many fights as him. And we see fighters all the time come in with like just blinding speed and incredible power, but you don't see many fighters that are more mature than their age and record would seem to indicate. That's almost the most impressive thing about Ciryl Gane to me.
Well, you also see indications of just how smart he is by his just incredible improvement from fight to fight. Like, it's just he's almost like a different fighter sometimes, just in the span of a few months. I remember when he was about to make his UFC debut, I wasn't really that impressed with what I had seen of his free fights before. I'm like, okay, he's athletic and whatnot, but he very quickly changed my mind because he just kept showing such tremendous improvement every single time he came out. And he just kept doing that consistently again and again and again. And in a very short while, he went from just this raw athletic guy to an extremely skilled, high level, smart fighter.
A bit like a heavyweight AJ McKee.
Yeah, a little bit. Except he started much later on.
Well, he started much later on, but it's heavyweight. You can't win 16 fights in a row at heavyweight without being the champ of something. So, you know, he was thrust into the spotlight pretty quickly. Unless you have anything else on this, I certainly appreciate you taking the time and, you know, obviously your insights and all of your research and study in helping me break down these fights. Anything else you want to weigh in on, or?
No, hopefully it's an exciting card. There's some very interesting fights from the standpoint of analysis. There's hopefully going to be some very exciting fights from the standpoint of action.
We can only hope. This has been the Sherdog Radio Network preview for UFC 265, Lewis versus Gane. For Lev Basarski, I am Ben Duffy. Thank you for listening. Enjoy the rest of your week. Certainly enjoy the fights. And Keith, my usual co-host, is on vacation. He's getting back on Saturday, so we'll actually be doing the recap on Sunday morning. You hopefully already subscribed to the Sherdog YouTube page, but if not, go subscribe now. And we'll also announce it on the Sherdog front page. We'll do a live recap, take all your questions, all your comments. If I am dead wrong about some of these picks, you can all pile on to me while Keith sits safe and sound, not having put himself out for the world like that. Thank you and good night.